Beyond the Gates spoilers for Wednesday, September 24, 2025 tease that June's story takes an unexpected turn when fate brings in the person she thought she would never have to face again. For years, June carried the pain of abandonment, the silence of unanswered questions, and the lingering burden of raising two children only in her memories without the ability to care for them herself. Her arrival at Fairmont Crest was supposed to mark the beginning of something new. She was welcomed with an unexpected generosity by the Dupree family, and Naomi, in particular, became the lifeline she didn't know she needed. Naomi's support helped her find the whereabouts of her children, something June thought impossible after all this time. The days that followed her reunion with her children were colored with both joy and tension. She could not yet be their full-time mother. Martin and Smitty, the adoptive fathers, had raised them with stability and love. They provided the safety net June could not offer at the time, and while her heart ached for the years she lost, she was relieved to see her children happy, well cared for, and surrounded by people who truly valued them. What struck her most was Martin's quiet worry. He noticed how June, though eager, carried traits that unsettled him. Working in a restaurant, June often reacted sharply, sometimes with a lack of patience or an impulsive edge that did not fit the delicate rhythm of service. Martin tried to brush off these observations at first, attributing them to nerves or the difficulty of starting fresh in an unfamiliar environment. But as time went on, he saw her outbursts and thoughtlessness could create bigger problems. It was then that he turned to his mother, Nicole, for help. Nicole had lived through her share of hardship, but what defined her most was her grace. She carried herself with dignity, and when she entered a room, her calm authority softened everyone around her. Martin believed Nicole could guide June toward the balance she needed, perhaps even inspire her to slow down, listen, and find stability in this new chapter. June, however, felt conflicted. She respected Nicole's wisdom, yet bristled at being instructed, as though every lesson reminded her of the years she had been unable to manage her own life. Still, she tolerated it, if only for the sake of showing Martin she was willing to try. Her introduction to Martin's family came with both warmth and discomfort. One afternoon, she found herself drawn into conversation with Anita, Martin's cousin. Anita had a way of disarming people. She spoke with humor, her eyes lighting up whenever she found a moment of connection. June forgot the pressing duties of her job, enchanted by the chance to sit down and sip tea, to feel, for once, like she belonged among people who accepted her without judgment. But the illusion shattered when the manager's voice cut through the room, stern and disapproving, reminding June she was there to work, not to drift into leisure. Flustered, she returned to her tasks, cheeks burning, aware that every misstep seemed to confirm Martin's concerns. It was what happened afterward, however, that turned her fragile new life into a storm of chaos. A customer entered the restaurant, and something in his presence set June's entire body on edge. The moment she caught his face, recognition exploded inside her, faster than reason could intervene. She lunged forward and struck him, unable to restrain the fury that had lived in her for years. Gasps erupted around the room as patrons scrambled back, chairs screeching against the floor. Before the situation escalated further, Jacob stepped in, seizing June's arms, his voice sharp as he demanded she stop. Only when he looked at the man she had attacked did realization hit him with its own kind of violence. The man was Marcel Malone. To everyone else, he was just a shaken guest, straightening his jacket and demanding an explanation for the assault. But to June, he was the man who had once sworn to stand by her, who had walked away from their life together, leaving her to pick up the pieces. She shouted it without hesitation. This was the man who abandoned her, the father of her children. The room fell silent, thick with disbelief. Jacob's face betrayed his shock, but Malone denied it at once. His words were calm, practiced, as though this accusation was nothing more than the rambling of a woman he did not know. The more he rejected the claim, the more enraged June became. Jacob, trying to contain the chaos, pulled her aside and whispered urgently, asking if she could possibly be mistaken. But June's eyes burned with conviction. She was not wrong. She would never forget that face, those eyes, the tone of his voice when he once promised her forever. Every detail screamed the truth. And yet Malone's denial twisted the air into something unsteady. Jacob urged her to steady herself, warning her that if she continued down this path with such recklessness, she risked everything: her job, her chance at stability, even the fragile relationship she was beginning to build with her children. June was left shaking, the adrenaline of her outburst leaving her raw. She returned reluctantly to her duties, though her mind was nowhere near the table she was meant to serve. The whispers spread quickly through the staff, through the patrons who had witnessed the confrontation. The possibility of scandal hung in the air. Jacob knew it could not be ignored. An investigation would have to be made. Not when accusations carried this kind of weight. As she tried to keep her composure, June's mind replayed every fragment of her past with Malone. The nights they planned a future, the way he had once touched her shoulder in comfort, the day he walked out with no explanation, leaving her to cradle 2 children with nothing but uncertainty. The anger she carried was not just about him abandoning her, it was about the years lost, the struggle she endured, and the quiet humiliation of being left behind. His denial struck her as cruel, not just to her, but to the children who had grown up without him. She wanted to scream the truth until the whole world had no choice but to believe her. Martin, upon hearing what happened, felt torn in a dozen directions. He worried for the children, who would inevitably be caught in the fallout of these revelations. He worried for June, who seemed increasingly volatile, yet so desperate to reclaim what she had lost. And he worried for himself and Smitty, who had worked tirelessly to provide a secure home, only to now face the possibility of upheaval. If Malone truly was the biological father, what rights might he claim? What damage might he cause, simply by existing again in their lives? She had always been able to read people, and she saw in June not just anger but deep wounds. Wounds that would not heal simply because someone told her to calm down. Nicole knew this was not about one man's denial, it was about the battle between truth and perception, between the past that lingered and the future that demanded order. She resolved to stay close, to guide June where she could, though she knew there would be moments when June might reject her help entirely. Naomi, meanwhile, became the quiet anchor. She reminded June to breathe, to focus, to not let Malone's denial shake the truth she knew inside herself. Naomi had been the one to lead her back to her children, the one to offer her a job when she needed direction. More than anyone, she believed June deserved a second chance. Yet even Naomi could not deny the seriousness of the claim. If the investigation proved Malone was indeed the father, it would rewrite everything for all of them. The days following the confrontation stretched long and heavy. Gossip spread through Fairmont Crest, the name Malone whispered with curiosity and suspicion. June tried to focus on work, but her nerves betrayed her. Every time the door of the restaurant opened, she half expected Malone to appear again, smirking at her pain, dismissing her accusations with a shake of his head. She found herself rehearsing words in her mind, imagining confrontations, arguments, proof. Her world had narrowed into a singular obsession, forcing the truth into the light. Jacob arranged discreet conversations, trying to piece together the fragments of what happened. He asked questions carefully, noting June's certainty, noting Malone's refusal. The more he looked at them side by side, the harder it became to untangle. He wanted evidence, something undeniable. Without it, everything was just noise, passion against denial, memory against polished calm. And yet Jacob could not shake the feeling in his gut, the sense that June was not simply acting out of hysteria. There was something real beneath her rage. June, for her part, clung to her memories like armor. She remembered the exact day Malone walked out. She remembered the silence that followed, the letters unanswered, the nights when her children cried and she whispered promises she wasn't sure she could keep. To see him now, dressed well, carrying himself as though nothing had ever happened, filled her with a fury that consumed her. But underneath the fury lay something more dangerous, the flicker of old love, buried under years of pain, still capable of shaking her when she least expected it. The Dupree family continued to surround her, though they too felt the strain. They had taken her in, given her hope, and now they watched as her past threatened to collapse the delicate future they were building. Still, they did not abandon her. They reminded her she was not alone this time, that whatever truth emerged, she would not have to face it in isolation. Yet even with their support, June lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, haunted by questions. What if Malone managed to convince everyone she was wrong? What if the children, hearing his denial, began to doubt her? What if her chance to reclaim her place in their lives was shattered not by her mistakes, but by the manipulations of a man who had already taken so much from her? And beneath all those fears pulsed the most dangerous thought of all: what if the investigation revealed something she was not prepared to face? The days after the confrontation spiraled into a strange kind of suspense, as though every breath June took was weighed against an invisible clock counting down toward a revelation. The possibility of a formal investigation became the undercurrent of her daily life. Whispers followed her in the restaurant, among the staff who once tolerated her fiery temper but now measured every glance, wondering whether she was about to collapse under the weight of her claims. Jacob shouldered more than anyone realized. To the staff, he was the calm enforcer, the manager who stepped in before chaos could devour the dining room. To June, he became a fragile lifeline, the one person who listened closely when others merely nodded. He wanted to believe her, though Malone's cold denial lingered in his mind. Jacob had known June only in this new phase of her life: ambitious, messy, determined to reclaim something she had lost. He did not know the woman she had been before, the woman who believed in Malone once. His doubts were not about her honesty, but about memory itself, the way trauma could blur, distort, intensify. Still, every time she repeated her claim, her voice unwavering, he found it harder to imagine her wrong. Martin, on the other hand, grew restless. He had dedicated himself to raising the children with Smitty, and though he carried compassion for June, he also carried responsibility. He saw the storm threatening their carefully built home, and it filled him with dread. June's anger, her rash decisions, the way she hurled herself at Malone without hesitation, these were not qualities he could ignore. He had given her chances, introduced her to his family, tried to anchor her. But now he questioned whether her presence endangered more than it healed. At night, when the children were asleep, he spoke to Smitty in low tones about contingency, about what they would do if this erupted into custody battles or media scandals. Smitty, ever pragmatic, reminded him that bloodlines were not everything. What mattered was stability. What mattered was love. Yet even Smitty admitted they had to brace themselves for impact. Nicole observed it all with an unflinching gaze. She did not scold or lecture, though she often wanted to. Instead, she drew June into conversations that seemed casual at first but carried lessons within them. Over tea, Nicole asked about patience, about listening before speaking, about the difference between anger and action. June resisted, sometimes snapping back, but later, in moments of solitude, she found herself replaying Nicole's words. It unsettled her to realize that Nicole's guidance was seeping into her thoughts, reshaping them even as she tried to cling to her own instincts. Naomi remained the most steadfast. Her loyalty to June was unshaken, though she too wrestled with unease. She had seen the good in June, the desperate love for her children, the willingness to rebuild from nothing. She reminded her daily that panic would serve no one, that the truth, if it was truly on her side, would surface in time. Naomi also began asking quiet questions around town, gathering pieces of gossip, fragments of Malone's history, searching for threads that might prove or disprove his connection to June. The more she uncovered, the more unsettled she became. Malone had lived in shadows, drifting between cities, never fully tied to one place. His records, though clean on paper, carried gaps, months unaccounted for, places where stories did not align. It was not proof, but it was enough to suggest that his polished denial might not be the whole truth. The children, though shielded as much as possible, sensed the tension. They asked questions, whispered in corners, studied June with wide eyes that flickered between curiosity and wariness. June's heart broke each time she saw the distance in their expressions, the uncertainty of whether to believe her. She wanted to hold them, to tell them stories of the nights she dreamed of them, but she feared pushing too hard. They had grown up in a different rhythm, in a home where Martin and Smitty had provided consistency. To suddenly demand their allegiance would only deepen the confusion. It was Jacob who proposed a solution. though tentative, knowing it could ignite more conflict. He suggested that June and Malone agree to a blood test. Science, after all, could cut through the haze of memory and denial. June seized on the idea immediately, her voice firm, almost triumphant. But when the suggestion reached Malone, his reaction was a smile edged with contempt. He claimed he had no obligation to indulge the accusations of a volatile woman he barely knew. His refusal only deepened the divide. To June, it was confirmation. To others, it left space for doubt. The Dupree family wrestled with the implications. Naomi insisted that Malone's refusal was telling Kat if he were innocent, he would have nothing to fear. Martin countered that a man of Malone's stature might simply reject the idea on principle, unwilling to be dragged into drama. Nicole, as always, asked the question no one else wanted to voice: what if the truth was not as simple as June believed? Tension mounted in the restaurant as June struggled to perform her duties under scrutiny. The memory of her outburst lingered with every tray she carried. She felt the eyes of customers, wondering if she would snap again. One evening, overwhelmed by whispers and sidelong glances, she nearly walked out. Naomi caught her at the door, her hand firm on her arm, reminding her that walking away now would only give Malone more power. June stayed, but the fire inside her grew hotter. The children began spending more time with June under supervised visits, a small concession that brought both joy and heartache. She cherished the moments, but every hug, every laugh carried the reminder that she was not yet fully theirs. Martin watched these visits carefully, his protective instincts bristling. He wanted the best for the children, but he could not ignore the volatility in June's behavior. Nicole urged him to be patient, to allow space for healing, but Martin feared that patience might cost them everything if Malone chose to assert himself. Jacob, increasingly drawn into the heart of the conflict, found himself at odds with his role. He was not family, not bound by blood or history, yet he was becoming the mediator, the quiet voice between storms. He began documenting events, dates, times, words spoken. If the situation escalated into legal battles, he wanted facts, not rumors. He also noticed Malone's calculated presence. Though he avoided direct confrontation, Malone began appearing near the restaurant, near familiar gathering spots, always watching, always reminding June he was not gone. The subtle intimidation gnawed at her, but she refused to cower. Late one evening, after a long shift, June sat with Naomi in the quiet of the Dupree home. The air was thick with exhaustion, yet June's eyes burned with determination. She confessed that part of her feared Malone not just because of his denial, but because of what he might reveal if pressed too far. There were secrets in their past, choices she had made in desperation, that could be twisted against her. Naomi listened without judgment, reminding her that truth was not always clean, but it was still worth fighting for. Meanwhile, Martin confided in Nicole that he was considering legal counsel. He wanted to protect the children from the chaos, from the possibility that Malone might suddenly claim rights. Nicole, though supportive, cautioned him against rushing. The courts were merciless, and dragging the children into battles too soon might scar them in ways no ruling could repair. She urged him to wait, to see if Malone's arrogance would eventually undo him. Smitty, quiet but observant, became the stabilizer in their household. He reminded Martin that the children trusted them because they had always been present, always reliable. Whatever storm raged outside, their bond would not shatter overnight. Still, he admitted he worried about June's influence or volatility, her recklessness, the way she threw herself into battles without strategy. If she wanted to truly reclaim her place, she would need to learn not just passion but restraint. As weeks passed, the tension reached new heights. Rumors swirled in Fairmont Crest, dividing the community into those who believed June's story and those who dismissed it as delusion. Malone's polished demeanor earned him allies, while June's fire earned her sympathizers. The stage was set for a reckoning, one that would not simply decide the truth of parentage but the future of every bond at stake. In the quiet moments between storms, June stood at the threshold of her children's world, watching them laugh with Martin and Smitty, feeling both pride and grief. She knew she had returned too late to erase the years of absence, but not too late to fight for a place in their future. Yet with Malone circling like a shadow, denying her truth with a calm smile, she also knew that every step forward would demand more than anger. It would demand strategy, patience, and a willingness to face not only his lies but her own mistakes. The Dupree family, Jacob, Naomi, Martin, Smitty, and Nicole found themselves bound together in the unraveling conflict, each carrying their own stake, their own fears. None of them could predict how the next revelation would reshape their lives, but all of them understood one truth: the past was no longer buried. It was alive, demanding answers, and no one would emerge untouched. The storm that began with a single outburst in a restaurant eventually swelled into a confrontation no one could avoid. June had fought fiercely, clinging to her certainty that Malone was the man who abandoned her, the father of her children. His denial echoed through every hall of Fairmont Crest, twisting neighbors and acquaintances into divided camps. Yet the more he refused, the more relentless she became. Naomi worked quietly behind the scenes, gathering every scrap of information. At last, her persistence yielded something tangible: records from a small town 2 states away, showing Malone living under another name during the very years June carried and gave birth to her children. He had been there long enough to leave a trail: an old employment file, a rental agreement, even a faded photograph from a community event. The man in the photograph wore the same calm smile, the same polished posture, yet beside him stood no family, no mention of roots. Naomi brought these fragments to Jacob, who studied them carefully. It wasn't irrefutable proof of paternity, but it was proof of Malone's double life, proof that his spotless image was carefully curated illusion. When confronted with this evidence, Malone's mask cracked for the first time. He didn't lash out, he didn't confess. Instead, he shifted the blame, insisting June had fabricated the connection, that Naomi was conspiring out of loyalty, that everyone wanted to tear him down. But cracks widened quickly, and whispers of his false identity spread. Those who had once defended him began to waver, uncertainty creeping into their voices. June, though vindicated, realized that truth alone was not enough. To secure her future with her children, she had to demonstrate not only that Malone had lied, but that she could be the stable presence they needed. Martin and Smitty still worried about her volatility, about the risks of letting her back in too quickly. Nicole, in her quiet wisdom, pointed this out to June, telling her that rage could win battles but not wars. "If you want to be their mother again," Nicole said one evening, "you must show them not only who left them behind, but who will never leave them again." This advice settled deep in June's heart. For weeks, she worked to prove her consistency. She took Nicole's guidance seriously, absorbing the lessons about patience, listening, and humility. She mended her working habits at the restaurant, arriving on time, focusing on service, silencing her impulses to lash out. Jacob noticed the change first, impressed by the way she channeled her passion into discipline. Naomi noticed too, and encouraged her, reminding her daily that small steps mattered. When the children saw these changes, something softened. They still leaned on Martin and Smitty, their constants, but they began to trust June in new ways. They invited her into their small secrets, let her share in their laughter, asked her questions about the past. For the first time, June felt she was building not on rage or desperation, but on genuine connection. Malone, increasingly cornered, made one final move. He announced he would leave Fairmont Crest, claiming the environment had turned hostile. But June saw the retreat for what it was, an admission without words. He had no intention of proving himself, no desire to face the tests that could settle everything. His silence became its own confession, his departure the collapse of the facade he had clung to so fiercely. For June, the victory was bittersweet. She had wanted him to admit the truth aloud, to stand in front of the children and acknowledge what he had done. Instead, he vanished much as he had years ago, leaving her once again to pick up the pieces. But this time, she was not alone. Naomi stood at her side, proud of her resilience. Jacob remained steady, documenting every step of the process in case Malone never tried to return. Martin and Smitty, though cautious, recognized the effort June had made and the strength she had shown. They opened the door wider, allowing her not only visitation but shared responsibility. The children, sensing the shift, began calling her Mom Agonet every day, not in every breath, but often enough that June's heart healed a little more each time. The community of Fairmont Crest, once divided, slowly stitched itself back together. The restaurant no longer buzzed with gossip about June's outburst but instead with quiet admiration for how she endured. The Dupree family's name carried even more respect, for they had been the ones to hold her steady, to remind everyone that second chances were not gifts handed freely but battles fought and earned. In the end, June stood at the edge of her children's lives not as a ghost from the past but as a promise for the future. Malone had returned only to prove, once again, that he would not stay. But she had stayed, she had fought, and she had grown. The doors she once thought closed forever now opened, not all at once, but one by one, revealing a path she was finally ready to walk. And as she walked it, she realized something vital. The gates she had crossed were not only the gates of Fairmont Crest, not only the gates of her children's world. They were the gates of her own resilience, her own redemption, the place where pain ended and possibility began.